It was the summer of 1986 in the bustling city of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Luciana was a 27-year-old dancer living in the lively neighborhood of Copacabana. She had flowing dark brown hair that cascaded halfway down her back. Luciana took great pride in her long locks, as dancing with her hair swinging freely was part of her act. Ever since she was a young girl growing up in São Paulo, Luciana had dreamed of becoming a professional dancer. She started taking dance classes at the age of 5 and continued honing her skills throughout her childhood and teenage years. When she turned 18, Luciana moved to Rio on her own to pursue her passion for dance. She spent years performing in small venues and working odd jobs before finally landing a role as a samba dancer in one of the best clubs in Copacabana. Luciana was thrilled to be living her dream, getting paid to dance samba every weekend while tourists and locals cheered her on. Her talent and striking looks, especially her long dark hair, made her one of the club's most popular dancers. Luciana lived in a small but cozy apartment just a few blocks from the beach. She enjoyed walking along the shoreline in the mornings before dance practice, feeling the ocean breeze flow through her long locks. In the evenings after her shows, Luciana would meet up with her fellow dancers to unwind at lively cafes and bars. One night after finishing her set, Luciana left the club later than usual. She strolled down the quiet streets toward her apartment, looking forward to soaking in a warm bath before bed. As Luciana turned down an empty side street, she suddenly felt a strong hand grab her from behind. Luciana opened her mouth to scream for help, but a second man clamped his hand over her mouth, muffling her cries. The two men dragged Luciana into a nearby alley as she struggled desperately to break free. "Don't fight it, Linda," one man growled menacingly in her ear. Luciana's heart pounded, terrified about what they might do to her. The men forced her down the alley into the back door of what looked like an abandoned warehouse. Luciana tried to scream again, but the man just squeezed his hand tighter over her mouth. Inside, Luciana saw a group of 7 other dangerous-looking men waiting eagerly. The man holding her shouted to the others, "The dancer is ours now." Luciana realized with horror that she had been targeted and kidnapped by one of the dangerous gangs that operated in the city. The men forced Luciana down into a chair in the middle of the dim warehouse. They tied her wrists and ankles tightly to the arms and legs of the chair so she couldn't escape. Luciana struggled against the ropes, tears beginning to well up in her eyes. "Please, just let me go," she begged the men surrounding her. But they just laughed cruelly, making her cry harder. The gang leader stepped forward holding an electric clipper. He flicked it on, the buzz echoing through the empty warehouse. Luciana's eyes went wide, instantly realizing what they intended to do. "No, please don't. My hair," she wailed, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She thrashed her head from side to side, but the ropes held her tightly in place. The leader smirked as he brought the vibrating clippers to the top of Luciana's head. "Say goodbye to your pretty locks," he sneered. Luciana squeezed her eyes shut as the clippers began ruthlessly shearing off her long, dark tresses. Strand after strand of her hair tumbled to the floor at her feet. She could feel the cool air start to hit her scalp as the clippers exposed more and more of her head. Hot tears streamed down Luciana's face. She continued begging and pleading for them to stop, but the gang leader just laughed as he kept shaving off all her hair. The other men hooted and hollered, cheering on her humiliating shearing. The buzzing clippers worked their way lower and lower, until finally Luciana's head had been shorn completely bald. Every last bit of her beautiful hair was gone, leaving her scalp exposed and vulnerable. Luciana finally stopped struggling, once her hair was completely shaved off. She hung her head and sobbed in despair, her shoulders shaking. The men surrounding her chuckled cruelly and made mocking comments about her ugly bald head. "Not so sexy now without your long locks, are you?" one man taunted. Another added with a sneer, "Look at her crying like a little baby over her hair." The leader knelt down in front of Luciana and gripped her chin, forcing her to look up at him. "Stop your sniveling," he demanded. "You're still going to dance for us, even like this." Luciana shook her head vehemently, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I won't dance for you monsters," she cried out defiantly. The leader's eyes flashed with anger. He slapped Luciana hard across the face. She let out a gasp, her cheek stinging. "You'll do as we say if you want to get out of here alive," the leader threatened in a low, menacing voice. He stood up and walked over to a stereo system set up nearby. The gang leader flipped through a stack of records and chose one, placing it on the turntable. As the lively, rhythmic samba music began pulsing through the speakers, the men whooped and hollered. "Dance!" the leader commanded Luciana harshly. When she didn't move, he nodded to one of his cronies. The man grabbed Luciana's arm and yanked her up out of the chair. She stood on shaky legs, sniffling as the music played on. Luciana hesitated, wiping the tears from her swollen cheeks. She didn't want to dance for these vile men, especially not with her head shorn bald. But their leering eyes and clenched fists convinced Luciana she had no choice. Slowly, she began swaying her hips and moving to the samba beat, the way she always had so naturally on stage. The men hooted and catcalled, making Luciana's skin crawl. With every turn and shake of her bare scalp, she felt utterly violated. "Faster!" the leader demanded, turning up the music's volume. Luciana forced her body to keep in rhythm, though inside she felt only rage and shame. The song seemed to go on endlessly as the men watched her bald head bobbing pathetically to the music. When it finally ended, Luciana collapsed back into the chair, spent and hollow. The men hooted and catcalled, making Luciana's skin crawl. With every turn and shake of her bare scalp, she felt utterly violated. "Faster!" the leader demanded, turning up the music's volume. Luciana forced her body to keep in rhythm, though inside she felt only rage and shame. The song seemed to go on endlessly as the men watched her bald head bobbing pathetically to the music. When it finally ended, Luciana collapsed back into the chair, spent and hollow. After being forced to dance bald for the gang, Luciana was exhausted both physically and emotionally. The men dragged her weak body to a rundown house nearby and threw her inside. "This is your new home now," the leader said with a sneer. "You belong to us." Luciana looked around at the filthy, dilapidated house. There were bars on the windows, and the doors were locked from the outside. She realized with dread that she was now their prisoner.